Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Jen Ewell. I'm the director of the Women's Foundation of Montana. I'm excited to have you all as a part of our conversation today. We're going to be talking some about workplace solutions for families. And I like to start out by just giving a little bit of background and doing some of our housekeeping. So for those of you who may not know, the Women's Foundation of Montana is a statewide nonprofit that is all about economic independence for Montana women and a brighter future for girls in the state. We do grant making. We also do some policy work. And at times when we can't figure out how to meet our goals through those two different pieces of work, we also start our own programming. And one of those is Powerhouse Montana, which is powerhousemt.org, an online platform to connect women across the state to resources and mentors. And I like to also just let people know from the beginning, we do record these and we will have it available both through a follow-up email and on our website if you want to refer to it later or share with others, but you should know that as you're doing commenting, etc. We usually have people mute their mics throughout most of the discussion and then open it up at the end if we're able to for some questions. But you should feel free throughout the webinar to go ahead and chat questions as well, and we'll work to incorporate them into the conversation as we go. We also love it if people are willing to introduce themselves in the chat so we get a sense of who's here, maybe where you are from, if you are willing to share that, so we can kind of see who's here from around the state of Montana. I think those are the main things that I need to tell you up front. So as you all know, caregiving and work has been a challenge for a long time in our culture. Sort of that balance between work and family is a challenge, especially for women who are still our primary caregivers in our families. That has been exacerbated in the last few years, of course, as more and more women are in the workforce, and it really requires two working parents and a lot of times to support families in our culture. And then, of course, this last year with COVID, it has been exacerbated even more as we have seen so many folks, and especially women, need to stay home either to provide care for their ailing relatives, to help school kids as kids are out of school. And just in the last month, we've seen in the press the huge growth in the number of women dropping out of the workforce due to these challenges, 865,000 in September alone, which is about 4 times as many women as men who dropped out of the workforce. So these are some of the big challenges that we're looking at. I'm really excited to have some experts with us today and people who are really engaging with these issues to help us talk about what we can each do about it. So I'd like to welcome a couple of our policy experts. Erica, maybe you could share the slide. Caitlin Jensen is joining us from 0 to 5 Montana, an organization that's all about looking at how we care for and educate our young kids from 0 to 5. Heather O'Loughlin from the Montana Budget and Policy Center that really looks statewide at our policies and our budget and how we can best invest in communities and families. And then we have a couple of workforce leaders as well, Katie Spika from Spika Design and Manufacturing in Lewistown, and Bruce Tribbensee from Submittable in Missoula, both of whom have really implemented some great innovative solutions to how workplaces can support families, and especially families that have needs and kids and are having challenges with this sort of work family balance. So thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to start out by asking our policy experts to share with us a little bit more about the challenges we're facing, and then we're going to talk about solutions. So Caitlin, I'd love it if you would start out by just sharing a little bit about what you have seen in your work as some of the challenges that are really facing Montana families, especially in caring for their young kids and finding childcare.
Let me get myself off mute first. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. Let's try this again. All right, I'm trying to, from the beginning. Okay, so when I was talking with Jen and Erica in preparation for this presentation, I wanted to be able to provide a few slides just to help set the stage for the childcare context in Montana. A lot of the work of 0 to 5 Montana, both at the statewide office and also in our local communities, is really targeted at these systems change efforts and, of course, childcare, our access to childcare, affordability around childcare, the childcare workforce, and how everything intersects with parents and employers is really critical to our work. And we're really excited to be able, as an organization, to be in a position to engage in these conversations in a really innovative and creative way. And so I wanted to be able to just share a few slides. This might be repeat information for several of you, just to set some context around the early childhood system. But right now in our state, we are mostly dependent on our funding system for childcare through federal dollars, both through the Child Care Development Block Grant, as well as through Head Start and Early Head Start federal dollars that are a direct federal to local. With the block grant, there are additional quality dollars that go to support quality childcare, to build up the workforce, to support subsidy for childcare, and to really help to bolster the infrastructure. But we know it's not enough, and so much of our childcare, whether it's center, group, family, home, neighbor, it really depends on the market, on the provider rate, on and then the true cost of care of how much it actually takes to provide quality childcare in our state. And so, of course, this also has a huge impact on parents, which I'll get into here in a minute, as well as with employers. And as Jen mentioned in her intro, this is a huge issue for women all across the state who are working to both balance home and work. And of course, COVID has definitely exacerbated this issue, but these are issues that have existed even before COVID. So just getting into this a little bit, as COVID hit in March and everyone responded, there definitely was an impact on our childcare infrastructure. We saw about a 40% loss in childcare initially, and since then, because of the funds that came down through the CARES Act, both funds that were dedicated through that block grant, as well as the additional dollars that were allocated through Governor Steve Bullock, who directed an additional $50 million to support childcare, both providers as well as families, really helped to make sure that the infrastructure was able to come back, but there still is a huge unmet need in our state, just as there was before COVID. It continues to be an issue. And so I won't go into a ton of these details. There's other experts on this call as well who can dig into this notion a little bit more, but the main point is just that this is a huge issue, and we see continued need and opportunity for how we can think about how we rebuild better, how we look at our infrastructure for childcare, and really think about partnerships in our local communities between business leaders, between childcare providers and parents, and how we can really think about strategies and solutions that could even be elevated to significant policies at the state level, as we've seen in other states who have been able to actively engage in policy discussions around, for example, increases in childcare subsidy or childcare task force that really look at addressing this issue, especially for infants and toddlers where the cost is really high. Here's just a few highlights on reports. I'll share these out afterwards too, so Jen can share these and Erica after, but they're just some really good resources that talk about, again, this childcare dilemma of where it costs a lot on average to pay for childcare. It costs a lot for two two-income households, and then oftentimes there's really tough decisions that need to be made, especially when more children are added to the equation, depending on where you live in the state and just the general cost. So on average, infant care is about $9,000 per year. On average, our in-state college tuition is about $7,000 a year. So parents are having to pay a lot for childcare. And then it's really important also, just in terms of equity and bringing this conversation around women in the workforce, that the majority of childcare educators are women, and the average annual wage is about $11.30 per hour. And so it's really tough sometimes to have these policy conversations because parents really feel the pressure in terms of the financial impact. And we also know that childcare providers just don't make very much. So where do we find that middle balance? Who makes up that cost? So these are just a couple of quick slides. I'm gonna try to skip ahead so I don't take up everyone's time, but just to show that we really, as a state, this is pre-COVID even, really just see many childcare deserts as we describe them. There's very few areas in our state, if really none, that are meeting the true need for demand of childcare for children under the age of 5. And this is from one of those previous reports I showed earlier. And then this is just a map to highlight the number of childcare providers who are enrolled or participating in STARS Equality, which is the childcare program that really looks at investments in quality childcare. It's a 5-tier, 5-star model. Definitely learn more about it. But as you can see in our state, there are not very many areas where there are very many STARS Equality providers. And for the purposes of quality definition, as seen in recent reports from the Early Childhood Services Bureau and DPHHS, quality is defined as being at a level 3 or higher. So I will get into these a little bit later, but I just wanted to end on a positive in that this is a huge opportunity in our state for us, again, to look at not only how essential childcare is, but what we can do through proactive and collaborative investments in our childcare infrastructure. It really is essential for a strong economy. And this is an image from the Alliance for Early Success, which is an organization we're a part of and are really working with other states on systematic strategies that we can bring to Montana, bring ideas back into our policy change initiatives, and really look at where we can capture innovative strategies that we're going to hear about later in the presentation today too, but how we can just really build off of that and help more employers and parents and policy leaders see what we can do as a state. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Thanks for the overview. I love seeing the maps. I think that really puts it in perspective, and especially how it helps show the difference between some of the larger communities in Montana and rural areas, and how big the disparity is there. Yeah, so, and also I love, of course, ending with some of the possibility. Thanks. So childcare, of course, is one huge issue for our state and early childhood education. And then another piece of this puzzle really is looking at policies within workplaces and paid time off for families. And I've asked Heather O'Loughlin with the Montana Budget and Policy Center to just start that conversation for us. Heather, if you would. I know this is a big piece of work for you and the Montana Budget and Policy Center, so thanks for sharing.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I good now? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's nice to join Caitlin in this conversation. Montana Budget and Policy Center has been looking at access to paid family leave for a few years now. So I thought I would share just a little bit of background on access to leave, and then how we've really seen access to family leave can benefit families and workers as well as businesses. So the just kind of a quick lay of the land. So many of you have probably already heard this. The United States is really one of only a handful of advanced economies that doesn't have a national paid leave policy. And that has really resulted in very few workers across the country accessing paid family leave. Recent statistics show about 20% of workers have access to paid family leave, and about 40% have access to paid medical leave, typically through an employer's short-term disability program. And again, both access to family leave and access to paid sick days has a significant impact on low-wage workers. About 75% of low-wage workers don't have access to either a single earned paid sick day or paid family leave when a family member gets sick or when they're welcoming a new child into the family. And for many women, they are making a very difficult choice to return to work shortly after welcoming a new child into the family. So we've been able to look at paid leave policies, both those that employers have provided, but also there are a handful of states, about a dozen now, that have established statewide family leave policies. And so we have been able to really look at what have the impacts of those policies been across workers, families, and also businesses. So studies have really shown that access to family leave can have significant benefits for both parents and children. Access to family leave improves the bonds between parents and their children. It has been shown to improve health outcomes, access to immunizations, access to preventative care services, and overall improved health, particularly mental health of new mothers as well. I think what's particularly compelling to us is that when family leave is provided to new mothers, they are much more likely to return to the workforce, and in most instances return to that current employer. They are more likely to have higher wages over their lifetime, and less likely to need public assistance as well. I don't have a slide particularly for family leave as it relates to taking care of older family members, but this has also been a particularly important thing in Montana. We know that adult caregiving also largely falls on women, and is often a reason why workers are leaving the workforce in order to care for an adult family member. As Montana's population continues to age, we continue to hear about families who are struggling with caregiving responsibilities of older parents, spouses, or other family members. So I think that's another important component of this discussion. So access to paid leave and how that benefits businesses. The states that have had statewide family leave policies in place for well over a decade, we've been able to really look at how this has helped businesses overall. One of the things that we hear from businesses in Montana that do provide some type of family leave or paid time off for caring for family is that it has been a really important tool in attracting and retaining workers. Particularly in rural areas where it is challenging to recruit workers. It has become a recruitment tool, and in many instances, you are able to really retain and keep those keep workers not just attached to the workforce, but really attached to that particular employer. And we've seen that in states that have a statewide policy as well. Increasing employee productivity and morale. So the state of California has done a number of surveys of businesses throughout the time that they've had their family leave policy in place. And the vast, vast majority of employers have reported positive or no noticeable negative effect on productivity. And then, I think another thing that I think, as we are looking at both, employee provided policies as well as the opportunity for the state to assist businesses in providing this type of leave, it really is a way that we can help small businesses better compete with larger businesses that may be able to provide these types of benefits on their own. Whereas small businesses often, I think, struggle to try to make this type of policy work. So I think, yep, that's all I have. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And happy to talk about Montana Budget and Policy Center did put in place a family leave policy a couple years ago. And so I know we'll get to some of the how this has played out in the ground, and happy to share some experiences we've had as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather, for that background. I really appreciate seeing not only how paid leave can benefit families, but also businesses, and kind of the business case for that. That's great. Okay, so we know that already there are workplaces in Montana who are really engaging with these issues and trying to figure out how they can help their own employees be more successful at that sort of work life balance and better for their own families and communities. And a couple of those we've invited to share their experience today. So Katie with Spika Design and Manufacturing from Lewistown, Montana is here. And Katie, thanks so much for joining us. We would love to hear a little bit from you, both about your company, but really about the policies that you all have already implemented to really kind of support your workers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking me to talk here. So we're a small business in Central Montana. We're in Lewistown, and we've got about 55 employees. And we are a manufacturing, design and manufacturing company. So I think it's, it's nice to represent the non-tech side, because I think typically tech companies are far more advanced in these kind of practices than some of the other ones. But we're just this little small manufacturing company in rural Montana. But my parents started the company about 20 years ago, and family is very important. It's one of the kind of foundational values of our company is family. And so over the years, we've worked on different ways to take care of our people and their families. And we have, I guess, kind of three main practices about that. The first one is we do offer paid FMLA leave. So a couple years ago, we started to have quite a few of our employees having babies and recognized that we weren't able to take care of them like we wanted to. And so we implemented paid parental leave. And so we are more men than women at my company, but we wanted to offer the benefit to both. And so mothers and fathers could take 6 weeks paid time off to take care of a newborn baby. And I think last year, 2 years ago, we expanded it to cover any FMLA leave. So 6 weeks paid time off for babies, sick family members, whatever FMLA covered, we're going to cover too. And that has been obviously the most important thing for us is taking care of our team and just representing our values. But like Heather said, it's also a great recruiting tool. We're in a competitive job environment, work environment in the middle of nowhere, and being able to say, we care about you and your families, and this is how we're going to prove it to you, has been a really good tool for us. Just this year alone, I think we've had maybe 4 employees out, which is a pretty big percentage of our little staff. We haven't got there yet, but childcare, of course, is a huge challenge. And Lewistown is no better off than, most other places. And so we have typically once or twice a year, we try to put together this leadership training program for our staff. and they get to do a project at the end of it. And last year's project was trying to figure out what we can do for childcare for our team. And they came up with a proposal to work with another company in Montana that helps employers find and reserve spaces and in-home daycares for their employees. And so that is, I think with COVID, it's sort of been put on the back burner, but we're working towards that, where we can reserve space for our team members, because so many of them are working with, you know, balancing grandparents or neighbors and just having a really, really hard time trying to find somebody to take care of their kids while they're here at work. So that's pretty important to us. Our dream is to have you know, on-site in facility childcare. We've toured a couple places that do that and just love it. It's not really in the cards for us, but we love this first step of being able to at least ensure our people have a place for their kids. Our last thing is just a philosophy of being really flexible about, you know, family first. And so just a couple examples. One of my team members, our controller, Monday realized that her kids' Halloween costumes weren't going to be in time for their school Halloween party, and they were, you know, devastated. And so she asked if she could take off and go to Great Falls to pick something up. And that, like, she asked, but of course there was no question. Of course she can take time off to go get her kids' Halloween costumes. Or last week we had our annual planning meeting, and our production manager's daughter made it to divisionals or some sports, you know, activity in Kalispell, and he asked if he could go see her run, even though it meant taking off a whole day from our annual planning meeting. And, you know, he asked again, of course, but it was an obvious, your daughter's first, your family's first, you can make it up, we'll fill you in later on. So I think those are some of the kind of the main ways that we try to take care of our team and their families from Lewistown.
Thanks, Katie. There's so much about that I love. I love the idea of having your team kind of do a challenge and come up with solutions. I think that's awesome. And they really kind of own those solutions. And then, of course, you have great supportive policies, and it's really nice to hear about those as well. I think you told me that you actually have a mother's room too, right? Is that true?
Yeah, we do. So we have a space for any mother who needs a place to do pump or anything, you know, if she had her kid here breastfeeding, but a private space is little couch and chairs. And I think there's a refrigerator in there and just a place for her to go. Most of our, well, it hasn't been used a ton because most of our leave has been taken by the fathers, but we've had a few times where mothers have needed it. And it's just a nice, you know, private, quiet space for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to invite Bruce to share a little bit about Submittable, both as a company and also some of the policies and even some of, I guess, the workplace structural changes that Submittable has implemented to really support their families and their workers. Bruce.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's great to be here, and I love learning as much as I can about this stuff. Submittable has also, we have two big areas where we have policies around this. One is the family leave part. We do the FMLA leave, plus we have a couple of extra weeks on that, and then we have a period of unpaid leave after you use the paid leave, which is optional. And then for the next year, you can work part-time, like you can have like 6 months of part-time on and off time. So we try to make it as easy as possible, which it's a really hard thing. So we understand that. And so we have those policies. One thing I wanted to mention is that it's, you know, as Heather talked about, there's this list of benefits to the company and the people around those leave policies. And one of them is that is pretty important, is that it makes people, it kind of minimizes people showing up to work tired and being distracted if they have this opportunity to take the actual time off and do that. So there's like the productivity benefits pretty big. along with the retention and the recruitment issues, those kind of things that are easy to think of. But when you get down to like the day-to-day, it has a surprisingly large impact on just the whole kind of feeling in the office when people can, you know, take the time they need and then show up and be able to engage. I asked for like why we did this at Submittable from Katie Lane, our HR person. And the last thing on her list was because it's the right freaking thing to do, which we also believe. We have that, we always have a mother's room also on our list. And then we put on-site childcare on. So, and we looked at the options. We looked at the partnering option. We looked at, I have some notes, paying for spots in existing centers and things like that. And because there was such a problem, there's such a need for spaces in Missoula County and in Missoula City. So it was clear we had to just do it ourselves. So we took a year, we got a consultant and put a childcare center on site and started with infant spots because it was the greatest need. And we had a lot of babies coming in Submittable. What else have we done? So I wanted to say that personally, you know, when this started, I have a 6-year-old now, but when we started this, I had a child in childcare, and I knew basically nothing about the world of early learning. And with the help of, you know, consultants and organizations like CCR and 0 to 5, I started to learn as much as I can. And this is also a great resource for me. And it was clear what we had to do, like how we had to fix this in Submittable and for a little bit in Missoula. And that I'm kind of excited to work on bigger solutions now. I'd really like to fix these problems in Missoula County and Montana. That's what I got.
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, Submittable has made a significant commitment, I think, to childcare and caring for your people. And I have gotten to be a witness of this, of course, because my office is also in the Florence building in Missoula, although I live in the Bitterroot. And so it's been fun to see, you know, the space and the babies and all of that. And we really appreciate you and your commitment. But I also appreciate, you know, your emphasis on not every business is going to be able to make that kind of commitment, right? And we want to talk about what are larger solutions that we can do as communities and as a state to really make that difference as well. So thanks, Bruce. I wanted to invite both Caitlin and Heather too to share a little bit, because I know both of you have some innovative policies that you've implemented in your own workplaces. And I'm going to go ahead and invite you to share if there are some of those that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to kind of bring out here as a part of this discussion. That'd be great. Caitlin, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start. Although I know Heather can really key into some of her really excellent policies. Is this also where you'd like me to talk a little bit about Family Forward too?
Why don't we save that for the very end, if you don't mind? Let's just talk about your policies, and then, because I want to get to some questions, and then do that at the end.
Okay, that sounds good. So as we've heard from businesses around the state, and I'll talk about Family Forward here in a minute, but a lot of the innovative strategies we can look at, it's like often feels like, well, it might be a lot easier to do that if you're a business where you're, you know, making more money. And as a small nonprofit, and we've just been around almost 2 years, we have a fiscal sponsor, and so there are some policies that we, you know, have to align with by virtue of being through a fiscal sponsor. But it has also allowed us, being really small and nimble, to be able to be really flexible as well. And so I'll get into some solutions here in a minute, but I think that there's just a lot of possibilities for what you can do even as a small organization, what you can promote amongst your employees and within your organization. So here at 0 to 5 in our statewide office, we've always promoted a flexible work schedule. We've always promoted being able to work remotely. Of course, now with COVID, it's just the way of the world. But really wanting to walk the talk and make sure that everyone feels like you need to have that flexibility. As we communicate about that, we make sure that we have some strategies, but it's definitely a huge benefit to our organization. And then on a personal note, I'm currently pregnant, and so I know how challenging this is, looking for childcare, especially infant care, in any community in the state, not definitely here in Helena as well. And so just recognizing that, and former organizations that I've worked with where there's been bring your baby to work policy, it's just really also helped a lot, and having that comfort of having your kids with you and being able to find some balance. But then also really being supported too, and that, again, that flexibility around your work schedule. So those are just a couple examples of where we're at right now. We hope to continue pushing and expanding on the types of benefits that we can provide as an organization. But those are some areas, and I will just say that with the Bring Your Baby to Work policy, I used to work for the Department of Early Learning in Washington State, and just learning from those policies in terms of how to set up spaces, what to have available in terms of sinks and fridges and refrigerators and all those pieces, and just really making sure that you're setting up an environment just as you would look for within a childcare setting, really wanting to make sure that the materials and equipment is available to make everyone feel comfortable, and just kind of create that spirit within the work culture too.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, I think it's interesting how it feels like we're kind of breaking down the separation between work and home in our work and our care spaces, right? I had the opportunity to take my daughter to work for the first 9 months of her life at the YWCA Missoula, and it was amazing. If I hadn't have had that, I don't know what I would have done, because infant care is so expensive and so hard to find. So that's great. Heather, do you want to share a little bit about some of your policies?
Sure. So Montana Budget and Policy Center put in place a paid family and medical leave policy a couple years ago. And, it's interesting. This is something that we had been working on for a couple years, but I think quickly realized that our own organizational policy perhaps wasn't consistent with the values of what we were advancing on a state level. I would say we've always been really generous and family friendly, but our policy, I think, often looks a lot like other organizations that you can use your sick time and your vacation time when you have a child, and other employees can donate their sick time to a pool, and then that pool. And I think what we realize that often will work, and new parents can kind of piece it together, but it often isn't always consistent across the organization. And for someone who's walking in, I think really understanding what they're eligible for right out of the gate is really important. So we it took us almost 2 years of conversations with our board and our leadership about what makes sense for our organization, and what we could responsibly do. And we ultimately provided up to 12 weeks of family and medical leave for an employee who has been with the organization for at least 1 year. That leave can be taken all at once, or it can be taken at various times. And it includes when you're welcoming a new child into the family, but also includes caring for yourself if you have a serious medical condition, or for a family member. We included a very broad definition of family, really in recognition that we have a diverse staff, and that family looks different in you know, for everyone. I think the one big takeaway, I would echo everything that Bruce and Katie shared about the values and the benefits of this. I would say maybe the one other thing that we really learned through this process was, I think overall it has made us a stronger organization. When we started this process, we were a team of about 6, so we're not a very big organization. And so the concept of having someone on leave for 3 months, really thinking through, what does that mean for our organization? How do we need to cross-train our staff so that we can continue the work that we're doing if someone ultimately has to take that leave? And, you know, in a case of a serious medical condition, perhaps we don't have a lot of time in advance of when that happens. So I think our board and our leadership really found that in going through the process of developing this policy, we've become a stronger organization. And I think that our staff really feel valued and part of this organization and part of this team. So we're really proud of the policy we've been able to put in place. We actually haven't had someone access it for a longer period of time at this point, but it's there in case it's needed. And I think as someone who has kids, and for those that have kids, I think caring for your child doesn't always feel like a vacation. And so for us, really separating that and making sure that parents and caregivers have the time that they need to take care of their family and also can accrue vacation and sick time, I think has been something that felt really nerve-wracking at first. What would this look like? How much time could somebody potentially take? But ultimately, those are 2 very separate things in our mind. And so making sure that employees are able to take care of their family, you know, is an important component. So that's a little bit about our experience, and, you know, would be happy to answer questions if there are any too.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I keep hearing in a lot of the comments people are sharing about their experience that really the flexibility and just the really thoughtfulness about their own particular situation and their workers is so important as we look at these policies. And I appreciate that about what you shared too. For those who have asked in the chat box about resources and examples and guidance and that kind of thing, as you create your own PTO policies, we're gonna plan on sharing in our follow-up email both some resources you can refer to, but also some examples of some of these policies. So hopefully that will be helpful to those who are looking at that. Okay, I'm mindful of time, and I wanted to make sure that we offered some time to talk not only about workplace policies, but about some of the larger statewide policies. We have a question from Grace Decker about that, and I think that would be good. I want to talk now about ideas and solutions more. And so I don't know who wants to jump in here, but I'd love to hear if people have anything they want to share about potential legislative or other larger policy changes that you feel like are really going to work to address some of these challenges. Do you want to start, Heather, since you're kind of right here with me?
Sure. Well, I'll go ahead and just share, and I can put this in the chat as well. We have a website for the work that has been happening over the course of the last couple legislative sessions to build support for a statewide family and medical leave insurance program. So that website is timeformontana, spelled out, .org. And it shares a little bit more detail about what this has looked like. You know, I think you know, again, for us, like, you know, it took us a little bit of time to really think through what this could look like for our organization financially. And I think that many businesses grapple with that as well. It is part of the reason why many states have established a statewide insurance program that that workers can tap into to access a portion of their wages when they need to take leave, family or medical leave. So that those programs are largely built through very modest contributions from both employees and employers into a fund that works similarly to a disability insurance program. Those programs have been really successful and have, I think, in many ways helped particularly smaller businesses who ultimately aren't, I think for many businesses, the struggle is am I paying out wages to someone who is on leave, and then do I need to replace that employee for a short period of time? What is that ultimate cost? So an insurance program really allows a worker to tap into the fund to access a portion of their wages. And in many states that have established this, employers have gone in and plussed up how much a worker can access up to the 100% amount. But typically workers are eligible for about 2/3 of their wages through the fund. So that is, I think, a policy that that we've seen proposed in the legislature in Montana for the last couple sessions. It has garnered some bipartisan support in committee, and I think there will be interest in pursuing that again this session. We've certainly seen more and more states taking this up and considering it. So that's one, and then maybe I'll let Caitlin if she wants to jump in on the childcare piece of it as well.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, that would be great, Caitlin.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm going to take a minute and maybe just talk a little bit about Family Forward. It's related to childcare, but then it kind of is like a larger platform initiative. And there's several folks who are on this call too who have been a part of it in different phases. And so I just wanted to take a minute to share a little bit about what this is. And basically it emerged out of a childcare workforce grant through the National Governors Association. I was co-chair for this grant with Siri Smiley, who was formerly with the Office of the Governor as the Education Policy Advisor. And through this work and the reports that I shared earlier from Amy Watson and Labor and Industries, really quickly came to find that there was a lot of energy also from employers in our state who are doing really good work, like Bruce and others, Katie, who's on the call, just talking about what are some solutions, and also just how difficult it is to sometimes make that connection as an employer to the existing childcare infrastructure. Like, how do you even navigate this whole system? What is a childcare resource and referral agency? What is licensed or quality childcare? How do I build in these partnerships? And even if there are some strategies or solutions that you want to implement, like, where do you start? And so the work of Family Forward emerged out of this National Governors Association grant as a way to help provide more or less a platform of policies, strategies, and solutions that could help just to really get your foot in the door as an employer as to the types of organizational practices you can implement, the types of financial assistance that you can provide, including as Heather so great, like perfectly described everything about paid family leave as a benefit to the state, and just like the challenges that we face here in Montana. And all the way up to another like tier of access around things like providing on-site childcare, creating a childcare cooperative, really investing in your local childcare infrastructure. And so the idea of Family Forward Montana is to be able to provide some resources and policies, practices, case studies from employers here in the state, and also create a way for employers to be recognized for the types of policies or practices they are implementing on any of those tiers, so that it can be used as a recruitment or retention tool as well to be recognized as a Family Forward Montana employer. So just by participating, it really kind of recognizes everyone in the state who is working to, implement strategies that are really good for parents, for employees with young children in the workforce. And so through this work, we're hoping to continue building this out. We're having an official launch coming up here in just a couple of weeks. And so I'll send out the registration link as follow-up to this call too, but it will be a way for us to really launch a website for employers to get on and tell us, what they're doing, and we can just start creating more of an inventory and a shared space for employers to connect, across communities, across the state about different strategies. And so we hope that this can be, kind of an easier way to navigate these systems. Through this, we're also creating different kinds of guides. So you can, it's kind of like a map of like where to start. Like if you wanted to do something like Bruce with an on-site childcare, step one is to maybe do like some sort of a needs assessment. And then you determine what kind of childcare best fits your organizational needs. You reach out to your local childcare resource and referral so that you can really figure out the licensing regulations. So just as Bruce described, like working with a consultant, it's kind of some of those strategies that are built in. So it can just be a little bit easier to access as you're pursuing different ways that you can, really support your workforce here in the state. And then the bigger hope out of all this too is that this leans into larger policy discussions and partnerships across the state in terms of how can we really look at addressing the childcare issue in our state. And as I mentioned before, putting together, as in Washington State did, a childcare task force that was made up of both employers and childcare providers and parents to really look at some strategies and solutions, especially around increases in investments into a childcare subsidy program. And so, as I talked about before, it's kind of making up that gap for what the cost of childcare is, the true cost of childcare is, but not so much of it falling on the backs of parents and employers as well. So there's definitely a larger effect to all of this, and we're hoping that this is just a continuation and growth in that conversation moving forward.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, we're excited to learn more about your new program, and we will go ahead and send out the link and follow up so other people can check that out too. So we are just about out of time, and I wanted to give everybody a last moment if you had thoughts on just next powerful steps from your perspective, either those who are workplace leaders from a workplace perspective, or if you feel like policy is it, like what do you see as our next powerful steps to really support families as they think about caregiving and that work-life balance? Maybe we'll start with our workplace leaders. Bruce or Katie?
Yeah, I think the way forward is to keep working on all of these different, like all the agendas, right? The family forward thing to get businesses all connected and get them ideas and resources to take any step. I also am personally really interested in the next legislative session, and like really, I have no idea how to help, but we need to get some statewide action.
Great. Yes. Thanks for that. I think that we can probably also send resources for people if they want to kind of keep track of the different policies that are being proposed in the legislature and how they can potentially even give testimony. So that's great. Katie, thoughts?
Oh, I don't think I have any wisdom, but I'm really excited about that Family Forward initiative. I think that would have been helpful for us, and it certainly will be for the the future. I think knowing about legislation coming up and being able to act on it would be really useful for me too. I'm out of the loop on that, so having it easily available to be able to take action on would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Heather.
Well, I definitely think for us, it was helpful to hear from other businesses and nonprofits that are thinking about these issues just organizationally. So sharing out policies, I think are always really helpful in connecting businesses with each other. I tend to think more on the policy side, and so I guess one thing I would just say is I do think that individual personal stories that can be shared with policymakers have been tremendously powerful. So on the Time for Montana website, we have a way that you can connect to get involved. I think sharing, either good or bad stories about your experiences with these issues, I think can go a really long way when we start thinking about policies on a statewide level. So yeah, just happy to stay in touch if folks are interested in engaging, and happy to also share our own personal experiences as well.
Great, thank you, Heather. Yeah, I think we'll follow up also with contact info from you all if you're interested in sharing that with the group too. Okay, Caitlin, any last thoughts? Especially, I think if there's anything statewide policy-wise around in the childcare arena or other solutions.
Yeah, I would just say that, stay tuned, stay connected as we launch Family Forward. That's one big thing. We're also a part of a national kind of state team that's really it's a national organization that's sponsoring our state team to really look at infant and toddler childcare solutions. And so that's something we're really focused on this year is this year we'll see what, how legislative session is going to shape out, but really looking forward into, 2 years from now as well. And how can we set ourselves up for success as a state this year? Another thing just to keep on your radar is some possible legislation coming up around preschool, and just keeping in mind that that would be potentially another year of supports for 4-year-olds that could really also be a huge benefit for working parents. And so just as those types of policies, strategies move ahead, just keeping those on your radar. And your voice is so important, especially as business leaders, as community leaders. Just really staying engaged in these issues, and like Heather said, the story, the power of the story, and the connection with your local members is very critical. So building those relationships does really make a big difference.
Thank you. Yes, so thank you all for joining us today, both, of course, all of our presenters with your wisdom and experience, all of those who joined us to listen in and introduce yourselves and shoot your questions our way. We so appreciate each of you and your interest in this and your willingness to join us in coming up with solutions. The Women's Foundation of Montana is doing a series of these webinars on some of the different challenges that are facing all of us really, but especially women right now. So last month was remote work and how we create really supportive remote work culture. This month, of course, we've been looking at this idea of workplaces and what they can do to support families. And next month, we're going to be looking at how we all create workplaces that really support diversity and a culture of belonging. And so, like I said, we're going to follow up with lots of great resources for all of you, an invitation to join these organizations and us as we work towards solutions together now more than ever. So thank you. We'll talk soon.